Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on from where you're logging in. Welcome to Beyond Sport's inaugural workshop week and the first session on the Industry Solutions track. My name's Radha. I'm Director of Design and Facilitation at thinkBeyond, the purpose-driven advisory arm of Beyond Sport. And it is a privilege and a pleasure to be hosting you over the coming days. For those of you that joined us yesterday and or this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're dialing in from, welcome back. And to those of you for whom this is your first session at Workshop Week, a huge welcome and thank you for joining us. This week we have an incredible programme of interactive sessions across 4 tracks aimed at supporting our sector to come together to connect, improve, reinvent and create solutions to current and future social and business challenges, whether they're individual challenges, organisational ones, industry focused or indeed societal. If you missed yesterday's sessions or want to revisit them, you can access the recordings in the Expo area of your screen, which is on the bottom left. I highly recommend listening to the athlete panel from Stay in the Game. It really was amazing. Looking ahead to today and this week, I just wanted to share with you some hints, tips and housekeeping to make sure that you can make the most of the content that's relevant to you. If you've heard this already from me today, please just indulge me for a moment for those that haven't. Workshop Week is designed for you to dip in and dip out of sessions as you need, to fit into what I know are complex and competing schedules, and to ensure that you get to experience the content that is most relevant to you. So do check in with the agenda and make Workshop Week work for you. A few little bits of housekeeping to help you on your way. We hope that you find this platform, Hopin, engaging and easy to use throughout the week. It's designed so you can interact with each other as well as with our speakers. One of the things we consistently hear after Beyond Sport events is that you all feel a little bit less alone, having met and connected with those travelling a same or similar journey to you, where you can share ideas, share concerns, share fears, but also share success and share joy. And that's what we also want to do this week. We want to help you do that by using this platform. If you look at the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see the chat function. Use this to let us know your thoughts on what you're hearing, any questions you might have for our speakers, and of course, let us know where you're calling in from. Tell us about the work you're currently doing in this space. In addition to using the chat function to let us know what's going on with you, I'd be really grateful if you could give our speakers a really warm welcome by sending messages in that space. When I host live events and I invite speakers on, I can see and feel the welcome they get from the crowd, the cheers, the smiles, the friendly faces that settle the nerves a little bit more. And whilst we can't offer them that in the old-fashioned way today, much like everything else, we're changing and we can do it in the new way. So don't be shy and share your appreciation in the chat channel. If you take a look at the right-hand side of your screen again, you'll see the People tab, which will tell you who is here. We've had over 700 people register on the platform, so it couldn't be easier to connect, network and share. You can search for someone and either privately message them or request a video call. You'll see a red dot next to people when you have new messages. If you're having any difficulty with the platform, please feel free to tag Ben Friedman in the event channel with a query, or speak to the Hopin tech team by clicking on the blue smiley face in the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. And of course, we will still be active on social media today and all week. So use the hashtag BYS Workshop Week and tag in @BeyondSport. We would love to hear from you. As ever, and I'm sorry if you've heard me say this too many times, I do assume you know where your own bathrooms are, where your own coffee is. So I think that means housekeeping is done and we are ready to go. We're opening the Industry Solutions track with a session on sport's role in addressing institutionalised racism. This session and topic couldn't be more timely, and it is crucial that we discuss our, as in the sports industry's, role in a specific and actionable manner. To that end, we've brought together a panel of experts to discuss the current challenges we face and the ideas to overcome them, after which we'll go into a breakout room for a facilitated roundtable discussion to identify how we can co-create tools and solutions for the sector. After this breakout session, Beyond Sport will take everything we've learned and we will work with experts to take action and do what we can do to bring to life solutions, tangible solutions that this industry needs. There are 2 different ways you can take part in the breakout session, and I will share more on that after the panel. So as I introduce our panel moderator, please get your typing fingers ready to welcome him via the chat function. And throughout the panel, share any questions you would like put to the panel. And if we have time at the end, we'll absolutely do so. Please welcome Chris Grant, author, Sporting England board member and co-founder of 14A. Welcome, Chris.
Radha, thank you. And hi, everyone. It's great to see you, or not to see you, but to see the list of names down the side. So I've been a great supporter of Beyond Sport over the years, and sometimes attendee and sometimes facilitator. And I think it's the best forum in the world for getting the right people around a set of tables, even if they're their own dining room tables, as in my case, to talk about important issues. So yeah, sports role in addressing institutional racism. So kind of an hour and a half, including the roundtables later, to solve institutional racism. I think we can do that, but we'll need some expert help. And I think if you're going to set out to attack big issues, what do you want? You want an evidence-based. You want academics who know about all the work and the thinking that's been done around these issues, but you don't want them to be too ivory tower. You want them to have some experience of the commercial world of what goes on in business. So you'd want that, but you'd also want someone who understands the practicalities of community engagement around issues that people care the most about and that are most important to us, like housing and education. You'd want someone who knows how government works. But none of that would be any good if you didn't also have real expertise about how you weave and tell stories, how you engage people and how you draw them in and communicate the important aspects of complex issues and problems. So I'm delighted to say that we've got all that and more on our panel this afternoon. I'm going to introduce them all and they're going to appear together. One of them was having some problems getting in, so maybe it'll pop up a bit later, but we're really lucky to have the Adidas Distinguished Professor of Global Sport at Arizona State University, Ken Shropshire. We're really happy to have the President and CEO of the Local Initiative Support Corporation, Maurice Jones, and we've got Documentary Director and President of the Nascimento Foundation, Kely Nascimento-Deluca. Please welcome our panel. It's really good to see you. So Maurice is still struggling to get in, but he will, I'm sure, at some point. And if he doesn't, then I'm really delighted to have the opportunity just to speak with the two of you, Kely and Ken. I'm going to introduce the session in a bit more detail in a minute, but before that, I'd love you just to introduce yourselves a bit more. And the question I'd like to ask you, and I'm going to come to you, Kely, first, is just very briefly in a minute, just say a bit more about do you see yourself primarily as a storyteller? So say a bit more about your work, but also because I think it's quite important. There's a lot of checking going on out in the world right now around issues of racism and institutional racism, triggered clearly by what happened and the killing of George Floyd. It's important also to check inside. So my question to both of you by way of introduction, in addition to saying a word about your work, is how are you and what's been going on for you over the last couple of weeks personally? So let's start with you, Kely.
Hi, thank you for having me here. I'm very excited to be here with this panel. So I have been, the bulk of my work in the last couple of years, aside from running the foundation, has been directing a documentary on women's football and going around the world and speaking to young women and their supporters, players, and then also the people involved in the running of the sport and the clubs and the teams and the federations. And it's been amazing, and it's always sort of intersects with race really well, the conversation. That's what I have been doing. The Nascimento Foundation is a foundation that my sister and I founded for my dad's kids. My father's Pele, the retired soccer player, and his kids. It was for us kids to sort of move forward with, using the name that he created and the love that he has fostered in the world to, use it to sort of keep moving forward and doing the kind of work that he liked to do. Now, how are you? Question. I'm okay. Today, I feel like it was a very difficult, really overwhelming. I think there was a lot of sadness. I think also a lot of fear for all of these incredibly brave. I'm so proud of this generation, but I'm also as a mom and a human, really afraid for them. As I sit in awe of their bravery. But I feel hopeful, and I don't know if that's just inherently I'm hopeful, but I do feel hopeful. I feel like there's going to be zero complacency with this generation, and I think that that's what we needed because we're tired, honestly. So I feel like that is a really hopeful thing that I would try to keep supporting.
Thank you, Kely, and I'm sure we'll revisit some of those themes as we go on. I've seen that Maurice is in, so he may pop up magically on the screen. But if he does in a minute, the first thing he'll hear is, Ken, please say a bit about your work, what you're focusing on, and also how are you inside at the moment, Ken?
I appreciate that, Chris, and good morning, Kely. I am an academic. I don't know, sometimes I say I'm an activist academic. I'm a consultant. I'm a lawyer, so do a lot of different stuff. Old man, so been around for a while in the sports space. We primarily do at the Global Sport Institute that I'm at now. I was at the Wharton School for 30 years, focused on business issues, social issues related to sport. Now I run a research institute that focuses on issues that can positively impact sports. We use the whole university here at Arizona State to bring in and do effective research on sports issues. And this has been a really, very, I don't know what the right word is, an intriguing time, as well as a time of despair and desperation. Starting with COVID and then being detoured by the terrible events of the past few days and back 2 weeks. So, we got to go beyond George Floyd and incorporate all these events that are happening in this moment. So how am I? So I grew up in Southwest Los Angeles, which is now South Central. Everything Black became South Central over the years. So I tell people, especially my white friends, that I have no new fear. I mean, there's nothing new about this. It's probably both of you recognize in terms of the types of, especially related to police brutality, especially related to police misconduct, especially related to police. This is something I've encountered my entire life. I can't remember a point in my life when I didn't know that this thing was problematic for my community and that I had a special awareness going forward. My only, as Kely said, interesting, you say worry about more than anything else is everybody else. Especially about my kids. I have 20-somethings. I have a 20-something son. I think they know the rules of the road, but as we've seen, even if you know the rules, it doesn't seem to matter. Even if you're attempting to do the right, that doesn't always seem to matter. So I am concerned about them from that standpoint.
And once again, we'll come back to some of those themes, I'm sure. Now, I've seen a message saying that Maurice is in, but I'm not seeing him yet. So until he actually appears on my screen, we'll assume that he's not quite with us yet. I just want to say that the aim of this session is that it's action focused, and it's a kind of like, what can sport do? What can we do? And we'll get closer to that at the end. One of the things, lesson number one for me is what we can do is, there's a wonderful quote, I can't remember quite who said it, but the quality of the intervention is often dependent on the interior state of the intervener. And I particularly think when you're dealing with issues which are so close to home, even if we have a lifetime's experience, just checking how am I actually, and giving yourself the permission to be exhausted or just overtaken with anger or other emotions is just part of what we have to deal with. And as you say, Ken, we're kind of used to it. But one of the questions I have for this session is, to what extent is now different? And if it is different, in what ways? And what particularly is the role that sport at all levels can play? So just as I say, Maurice may join us. And by the way, in England, I would call him Maurice. So a note on language. If I say Maurice, I mean Maurice. If I say football, I mean soccer. But I also thought, on a more serious level, because institutional racism is in the title of this talk, I thought, one of the challenges which I see a lot around different debates, but racism is probably a better example than most, is if you don't know what you're actually trying to deal with, if you don't know what you're talking about, then it's very hard to reach any conclusions constructively about what to do. And I just want to briefly flag up, before I come back to you with some questions about how we can deal with it. In 2012, we had the Olympics and Paralympics here in London, back in the days when it was really easy to feel proud of this country. And one of the flag bearers who came into the stadium at the opening ceremony of the Olympics was a remarkable woman called Doreen Lawrence. And her son, Stephen, in 1993 was killed at a bus stop about 2 miles from where I'm sitting right now by a racist gang, a group of young men. That was 1993. And what followed was a succession of failures by the police. They basically harassed the victims' friends and family. They spied on them. Everyone in the locality knew kind of who'd done it, but they let important bits of evidence go, etc. It was a catalogue of errors and disasters and nastiness, actually. And then in 1999, as we do over here, a High Court judge was appointed to kind of examine what had happened, particularly looking at our police force, the Metropolitan Police, and conducted an inquiry, kind of, you know, an old white guy who'd spent his life in law. And at the end of it, in 1999, so 6 years after the actual murder, Lord Justice Macpherson came up with what was, for the first time in this country, a kind of an official definition of institutional racism. And because it's in the title of our session, I'm going to read it out quick. It's not long, but I think it's an interesting, you may agree or disagree, Ken and Kely, and maybe my next question is what strikes you in it. But institutional racism in the Macpherson definition is the collective failure of an organization or network or society to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their color, culture, or ethnic origin. So it's a failure to provide a service. It can be seen or detected in processes, attitudes, and behavior which amount to discrimination through unwitting prejudice, ignorance, thoughtlessness, and racial stereotyping. So he framed it, you know, if a police service's role is to serve the community, if it fails to do that because of race, because of ethnicity or culture, and if it demonstrates that unwitting prejudice or ignorance or thoughtlessness, that's the description of institutional racism, as distinct from, say, violent, immediate racism. I'm just curious, either of you, Ken or Kely, as you hear that, to what extent does that chime? Or as you came into the session, how were you imagining institutional racism? Can I actually come to you first, Ken? Coming into this session, institutional racism, what's your sense of it?
Me first?
Yes, Ken. Actually, I'm seeing Maurice.
Ask so, Maurice. He got
yeah, saved by the bell. Maurice, can you hear us? To Maurice, can you hear us? He's on I've heard he's on an iPad, everyone. So, you know, technology. Yeah. Listen, Maurice, if you can hear me, we'll come to you in a minute. I'll introduce you properly, but we're just talking about the nature of what is institutional racism. And I just read out a definition here from England. I'm interested in your perspective. So, Ken, what does institutional racism mean for you?
Well, you know, first your definition, which my conclusion is that was a very complex definition to describe hate. I mean, it was really, you know, but I've heard that in the States too. There was a senator, someone that was asked, is there still institutional racism in the United States? And he said no, which is shocking. You know, we're beyond that, which is a lot of, in the States, we began to have that problem more intensely when Barack Obama was elected. You know, we're beyond race in this country. I mean, what I like about the definition, if I give it some credit, is it did try to weave in the institutional nature of the problem and how it can impact certain peoples and what it is that allows the institutions to act differently towards people, based on their color, based on their backgrounds, whatever it might be. So it's a long, you know, I'm in the academy, so it's a long-winded way of saying hate is still in the institution for certain people, and however it manifests itself, that's institutional racism.
It was written by a lawyer. So, Maurice, welcome. Can you hear us? Can we hear you? Okay, so we can see you, but we can't hear you at the moment, Maurice. So there may be something you need to unmute. But meanwhile, and I'll come back to you in a moment, Kely, institutional racism, what comes up for you when we say those words?
I'm kind of really happy Ken went first, because I feel like now I can fully adopt the angry Black woman part of this. He's so eloquent. Let's start with old white guy. I think that's our first problem. And I think that the fact that he actually wrote this is institutional racism. And the fact that you asked, that an old white lawyer was asked to write a definition for institutional racism shows, I think, the problem that the issue with the institutional racism and the sort of perpetuating of institutional racism is a deficit of like diversity of thought in decision-making positions and diversity of experience, diversity. So, I think that it's not it is about hate. It is about hate. And there's a million brilliant and beautiful and eloquent ways to put it. But I feel like nobody really doesn't know what institutional racism is anymore. And I feel often, at least in my, and it's like gender inequality for me anyway. I feel often that the questions are kind of like my kids when they keep asking the question until they get a different answer. I feel like we know, yes, and absolutely, it was very eloquent and it was very well put. But again, that's part of the problem, right? Is that it was written by a probably middle-aged lawyer.
It's so fascinating, and in a way, I'm hoping that we're role modeling what can happen in the round table after and through this whole workshop week, because I'm going to disagree with you, and the reason I'm going to disagree with you is that I'm completely with you on what racism is and its origins in hate underpinned by pseudoscience. Hundreds of years of rape and pillage, but I just got off a 3.5-hour board call with the Board of Sport England, and when you're talking about institutional racism, for me, one of the things I've been trying to do in the UK is persuade the main bodies in sport to admit that they are institutionally racist, and yet very few of the leaders that I know in those organisations exhibit hate. Some of them may have it in their hearts, and the reluctance that they, and very few of them are directly perpetrating acts of violence in the way that we often see police forces or whatever. But it's really clear to me when I look at the data and when I hear the stories, as I so often do, and I've experienced them in my life, of what happens to people of colour in the system that Sport England curates. It is racism, but it's not based, and it's connected to hate. But I think one of the big questions that a lot of white leaders are asking right now, and I welcome it because historically they've always just pushed it off, is, well, what can we do? And my answer, my answer is that one of the first things you can do is you can admit that definition or a variation of it does apply to the system that you curate. And for an organization to be willing to admit, to start off by saying, well, actually, we are, we don't intend to maybe, but the function of our organization is racist, is a massive step forward for me, for white leaders to say that. So what do you, argue with me?
No, I completely agree with you. And I think that I phrased it wrong. I don't believe that institutional racism in terms of the actual people. In fact, I believe that it's perpetuated by incredibly well-meaning, incredibly empathetic often, and incredibly allied individuals, right? But who are speaking for another experience. So I feel like, I believe that, so maybe what I should have said is it allows for the fostering of hate, right?
Okay.
Because it is right.
They feed each other.
Yes, they feed each other. No, but I 100% agree with you. And I agree even within my sort of qualitative sort of research, in the last few years with gender, is that the problem is that I noticed that was pretty pervasive was that in speaking to the young women and the people who support them, the issues they were describing were deeply and obviously systemic. And the solutions that were being provided by extremely well-meaning organizations, teams, clubs were often based on rhetoric. So it was like a campaign, fan outreach. It was rarely looking in and saying, okay, well, look at the people who are making the decisions. Right? Like, do they look like the world you want to see? Do they share the experience, any of them, of the world you want to see? Can they speak for, who's going to help stop making those tone-deaf decisions in advertising and in every aspect of public life? Who's going to be that person? And it can't be an intern, right? They raise their hands in a room full of decision makers and go, maybe not do that, maybe no, So I think that, so I am agreeing with you. I think I phrased it wrong. I don't believe there's hate in the actual, I do. I mean, in fact, all I met were very well-meaning and empathetic people. But what I did find also was that a lot of the time when people ask, what can we do? What they're asking, at least in my experience, is, all right, yeah, we're not going to do that. What else can we do? You know what I mean?
That's really, yeah, absolutely. You know, So just, I'd like to bring that to you, Ken, because I think in my notes it said that you have expressed in the last few weeks the view that maybe there is more optimism or more cause for optimism, that things might be shifting in a US context. I don't want to be misquoting you, but to what extent do you see the debate beginning to move on? Because what Kely was talking about was a really age-old thing, which you get this massive gap between those young women, in your case, Kely, right, and who's making the decisions. But that happens in lots of different contexts. And what are you seeing, Ken? And is there anything that's giving you cause to think this is different?
Yeah, well, I may have said something optimistic on a good day. So
you corrected yourself straight away.
So forgive me if I did. Now, I think we have to be optimistic in the sense of there has to be a better day. You know, we've hit bottom. So forward motion is about the only place that we can go. I mean, here are the problems related to what you said about institutions in sport in the U.S. that I think remain most problematic, and they were manifested in the obligatory statements that were issued by the various sports enterprises here related to George Floyd. Too many of them simply said, we will continue to engage in our efforts to be supportive of issues dealing with racial justice. Sort of a vague, you know, we are equal opportunity employers is kind of the US version of the generic statement that's been made for years, somewhat because the law mandates that you are such, so you might as well say that you are such. What was lacking, and this may be some of what you were both getting at, Chris, you kind of diverted us to this. None were specific. Virtually none were specific in saying, in this moment, we are against police brutality, police misconduct, police murder. They were not specific about the moment. They were as generic as possible. Some, and the NFL kind of highlighted how easy it was to say, at least, put funds towards the idea of moving forward, $250 million we've spent over 10 years to address these issues. And while they say this, though, and I beat up Major League Baseball quite a bit on this, they continue to have in their leadership, go to the Major League Baseball website, click on executives, and you'll see, I think it's 7 or 8 white men. So that in itself is indicative of where things stand.
I saw a wonderful thing that said everyone who put up one of those black square statements, you should have a link from that statement to your board and your executive team photo.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, not that and everything. Not that the white men could not be doing the right thing. Turns out in baseball they were not. It took 9 days to even issue the obligatory statement. So the priorities were not there to engage in the moment that the rest of the corporate world was engaging in. So I think a lot of the issues that exist continue to exist and aren't being addressed. And there's a wonderful kind of PR feeling to what should be done in the moment, but not so much the long term. And spending money is one of the steps, but peopling your organization that have these different viewpoints that can instantaneously give you insight that are in the rooms where decisions are being made. That's not happening at much of a greater level than it has been in the past few years.
Okay, time's going remarkably quickly. I think Maurice is not going to be joining us, but we've only got a few minutes left anyway. And I just want to build on what you've been saying into some sort of so what can we do? And there's a great poet called Akala, who wrote a book called Natives in this country. And he came up with a brilliant metaphor for some aspects of what we're facing and have faced for years, which he said, imagine if you live in an apartment and the people in the apartment upstairs, their plumbing is continually leaking into your apartment. but you have no way of getting into their apartment to deal with the issues, and they won't deal with them. So you're living with and you can't move. So you're living with the consequences of their faulty plumbing. And you could argue that a lot of what we see and what you've described, the institutions and the organizations that have been putting out these statements, they are the people. They're not the same as the people who you made your documentary about, Kely. They're the people in the apartment making decisions. And I'm not going to put you on the spot specifically, Ken, for example, but I mean, looking at the two of you, one of you, you're the Adidas professor. And I've seen you put senior Adidas executives on YouTube on the spot. I'm not going to put you specifically on the spot. Kely, you set up your foundation with your sister to magnify and amplify the power of a hero and the kind of hero who can only come out of sport. So my broad bit for the last few minutes of this is what advice can we give sports stars? Can we give executives about what they could productively do to contribute to fixing these things? Because I'll say it, Ken. I judge the Sport Industry Awards, or I chair the judging of the Sport Industry Awards every year in the UK, and I see how the sports brands have built their whole identity around cultural signals that come from the same parts of society that are oppressed. They literally build their whole shtick. I'm talking about the Nikes and the Adidas around black culture. And yet, what do they really do? And now you're probably going to tell me they do a lot. But my question to both of you now is, what could athletes do more of? What could corporations, particularly sporting corporations, what could franchises and leagues do more of? And Kely, I'll come to you first. And you might want to focus on what stars and athletes can do. But what would you like to see sport doing more of?
So I think that's a big question, but I think, okay,
about 2 minutes.
Okay, 2 minutes. Here's the thing. I think we have to stop asking athletes to be like lambs to the slaughter to speak about their causes and risk, being blackballed.
Yeah.
I think it's time to start asking the organizations to support athletes and support the causes. And I think, it's boring and it's not sexy, but you have to go to the decision-making groups in your organization and diversify them. Like there are no more campaigns or hashtags that are going to fix this. There needs to be diversity of opinion, of experience, of thought in the decision-making parts of the organization, or nothing's going to change.
Brilliant. Thank you. And you can't, basically, if this is going to work, what you just said, we'll take those photographs year on year of those boards and those executive teams, and we'll see them change. There's no messing around with that. Ken, what from your perspective, what advice would you be giving anyone in the sport?
Well, with Adidas specifically, I'll tell you, my conscience is clear, not because I knew you would ask the question. I sent a letter to Zion Armstrong last night, kind of expressing some of my thoughts on this, which I think is not exactly LeBron talking to Adam Silver, but I do think that's kind of the way we need to think about it. If you are somewhat in the inside, you need to take the steps that you can take. And if those steps aren't appropriate, then it's interesting what's happening in the NBA. The players saying, well, we're not going to play at all. I mean, it's very interesting to think how severe are you willing to go to try to move the needle some. There's a long way for all these organizations to go. My optimism, maybe there's a moment of greater realization of the severity of the problem. The optics of all these organizations, just about across the board, are problematic. The optics are, one piece of the problem. Then it is the action piece. And I say, I know we have a brief time. I mean, in this moment, if you take small bites of the elephant, how can your organization address police misconduct? I mean, that's a smaller piece of the race piece, but that is the moment we're in. If these and the ride-along seem to have some impact. The changing of law seem to have some impact. Changing commissioners have some impact. So if we address that and build out from there, but we have the bigger spectrum of we've got to deal with race around the globe, I think that then we're moving in a direction that's better than we're an equal opportunity employer. Let's all come together on that sort of thing.
Thank you. Powerful stuff. So we're almost at the end. What I haven't had the chance to do is bring in some of our audience questions and views, but I think after this session there is the roundtable so people can talk about them amongst themselves. Final short question, just coming from kind of like stage left, is so Kely, you made your documentary about girls playing football, And Ken, do you still teach actual students as a professor?
I do.
Yeah. Okay, so I'd just like you, if you can. I mean, Ken, you talked about, you know, I'm also kind of an old man. Kelly, you're the odd one out here. But
I'm older than
what are you hearing? If those girls or young women who you made your documentary with, if they were here right now, to what extent, Kelly, is it possible to articulate what you pick up from them that gives you think, if we had a bit more of that in the mix of sport and in the debates that we're having, it would really help? And I'm going to ask you the same question, Ken, about what you get from your students. But Kelly, first, what is it that we need to hear from generations following on from us, I guess is my final question to you.
So the documentary is I did interview a lot of young women, but the base of it and what it interests me the most is how gender inequality in football, because it's the world's most played game, reflects gender inequality in society. With the same with race, right? So I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking, but I think one of the things that was really exciting for me when talking to the young women, especially, or that part of the documentary, was their tenacity and their ability, so much more than ours, of our generation, and and even the next generation, to use the internet and social media. And this, to me, is one of the bright spots, and where the hope comes from, Ken, that you're talking about, is to apply just immediate and extreme pressure. Because public opinion is important, and I feel like today, some of the changes that are going to come, that are really exciting, are going to come because the repercussions when a brand does something stupid because of lack of diversity of thought in their decision-making pool is swift, and it is all-encompassing. And I think that has to do with this generation, and it has to do with the fact that we have access to the internet, and that is just absolute. It's absolute. And I feel that they are, what gives me hope, and what I do hope to keep seeing, is they're informed, they're educated. Even in far off places that I went to, where the information does not come as swiftly, and they're tenacious. They're determined.
I love that. So tenacity, and I'd also connect what you just said to what you said before about, let's not just let athletes be lambs to the slaughter individually. Yeah. It's about the ability of these younger people to connect so that they can present a united front with information and support flowing across their network.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Brilliant. Ken, what if you were channeling the next generation, what would you be bringing to this conversation?
Well, to amplify what they have begun to do much better than my generation, and that's to have a sincere, lifelong interracial relationships. They are friends. They grew up together. They are not from segregated neighborhoods. So problematic in the it still exists. I mean, again, that's the problem. How do we continue to move away and let that identity occur, that we are all people. We all have our faults and otherwise. I know the problems that I have because I grew up in those segregated communities. I struggle every day to not have my prejudgments, I hate the phrase unconscious bias, my conscious biases that I have about white people. I think I do a pretty good job of being aware of them, which I think is part of the problem. So the idea that they can move forward in the way that they have socially in the rest of society, throughout business, throughout government. My optimism is that my son, when he was in the 3rd grade, was trying to figure out if there were any black kids in his class, and I'm looking at the class list, racistly myself, looking at the names, trying to see are there any black names on the list, in the U.S. And I asked my son, is this kid, is he? And my son says, what difference does it make? Which has been kind of the theme I've had in my head about these kids. It's my problem. It's not something that should be carried over into next generations unnecessarily. So
very powerful.
These kids are better than us.
You have a wise son, and I think it's a lovely note to end on. And so I just want to, I'm really sorry that Maurice didn't make it, but a bit of me is a bit happy that I got to hear more from each of you. Really grateful to everyone who's been listening and adding stuff in the chat. We all, if we can, but certainly everyone who's on here is invited to move over. But I think I'm going to hand back to Radha now to just round things off. Thank you so much, Ken and Kelly.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Chris, for marshalling that so beautifully, as you always do. I learned loads as well. So thank you so much. Wow. And as Chris said, I'm really sorry that we couldn't get Maurice to join us in that panel. We were having some problems with some signal, but hopefully he will be able to join the roundtable discussion. I heard Maurice speak at one of our events last year, and he really is brilliant. So I would urge you to come and listen and contribute on the roundtable. And indeed, to that end, I have no doubt that that the rousing and insightful discussion has got many thoughts in your head whirring as it has in mine. And I want us to come together to try and translate those thoughts into action. We're going to move into a design thinking roundtable discussion, which will take place in one of the breakout rooms. The room has space for 20 people to be on audio and video, with a further 500 people joining to listen and to contribute via the chat function. And I really do urge you all to attend. So to access it, take a look at the left-hand side of your screen. You'll see a button labeled sessions. It's got a little red little picture by it as well. In a few moments, you can click on that button. And then you'll see a box with the name of the session on it. Click on that, and a member of the Beyond Sport team will let you in. If you're asked to share your audio and video when you've been let in, please do. And if it takes a few moments for you to be let in, please don't be discouraged. We do want you there. We just need to manage how we get people in so that everyone has access to the space. So this is a crucial topic. Whether you're on audio and video, or whether you're observing and commenting in the chat function, please join us to be part of the solution. A final thank you to Chris, Kely, and Ken. Thank you to Maurice for trying, and hopefully we'll see him and hear from him in the roundtable discussions. And I look forward to seeing and hearing some of you guys in there as well, because we do need to act together. Thank you.